Recording there.
Let's hope that holds enough memory for the whole show.
We'll see.
Yeah. Okay, you ready, Mo? Ready, John?
Audio's rolling, yep.
Okay, you ready?
Yeah.
Okay. Hey, everybody. Hello. It is podcast time. We are beginning season 8. Hard to believe. We're a little bit late starting the year, but we'll catch up. No need to worry there. We, as always, are in downtown McMinnville. In my cute little office, we have changed things up, as you can see a little bit. We are living room style in the front of the studio, which is my office, and abandoned my dark corner in the back. And we are here to drink wine, share stories, and make 2025 just a kind of a killer year. So we are starting it with a shebang, and poor Cam here is also being utilized as a guinea pig on our whole new setup. So welcome, Cam. Ghost Hill Cellars. I am so excited to have you here.
Well, thank you very much. We're very excited to be here. Beautiful setting, I have to say, even though it might be new. It's a beautiful setting. I'm very excited to be here representing our family, which has been in the Willamette Valley now since 1906.
So you got a little bit of time. You've weathered a few rainstorms, seen some snow, and you've actually watched this whole wine thing explode.
Yeah, we have. And I've actually been told at the tasting room, you're looking pretty good for somebody who's been around since 1906. But I said I always tell them it's the wine, but
you need to take a little credit for it. You're holding up okay.
All right, I'm doing okay. I have to give the credit to my family, my wife's family, actually, the Bayless family, who were the ones that came to the farm in 1906 and have basically been through everything you can imagine in that time frame, including the Great Depression. And our family has really pivoted at critical times, and we've just recently made another pivot where we opened a brand new tasting room.
It's beautiful, by the way. I do have intentions on coming up there on a Friday night and enjoying the view and the little fireplace thingies and some good wine and looking at the valley out in front of you.
It is, and I would encourage anybody that can get out there to see it, because obviously our family being on the farm since 1906, we knew how great the place was. And it is called Ghost Hill. That's the name of our wine that we'll be trying today. And let's go ahead and stop right there, and I want to go back to why there's the name is what it is, because there's actually an old ghost story that is true depending on who you listen to and what book you read. But so how did the name come about? Yeah, so it's funny because depending on who you talk in the family you'll get a different answer to that question.
Well, of course, that's the way it always goes.
So I'm always being accused of the one who embellishes stories, but this story doesn't really need a lot of embellishment, and because most of it's true. And the hill that we actually have built our new tasting room on is called Ghost Hill, and it was called Ghost Hill even before we got there in 1906. And so the joke that I always tell is that my wife's great-grandfather and grandfather bought a haunted hill when they moved there, along with the rest of their 220-acre farm. But the hill does have a ghost, and we even had that confirmed last year. We did a Halloween party for our first Halloween up there on Ghost Hill in the new tasting room, and we got a medium to come up. And
oh geez, where was my invitation? I would have been all over that.
Well, it's funny, just a little bit about myself. I'm an engineer by education and by training, and so somehow I got the job of hiring the medium. So you can imagine, I'm going through this process of where do you even start? I mean, do you just Google mediums? And so that's what I did. I Googled mediums, and I also had some people give me some insights, and I went through this process where I interviewed mediums. And
now that I would have loved to sit in on too, because I can only imagine how interesting and how quirky and a little bit out of this world that might have been.
And how scary, yeah.
And yes.
So I found the medium, and she came up. We had a big party. It was a Halloween party, people in costumes. We had a DJ and all of that. And she came, she looked like Wednesday Addams.
Of course she did.
Which, I kind of expected, but was also surprised at how really eerie and creepy, but also beautiful at the same time. It was kind of a weird thing. And then she disappeared for a couple hours. And so the party continued, everybody got on the dance floor, and the DJ was going, people were having fun. And then she showed up and said, I'm ready to give my report, in a very stern voice. The DJ scratched the record player to a quick halt. And she told us not only that we have the ghost that we all knew about on our property, but 3 other ghosts, which was very surprising. They obviously, our ghost, she told the first story about because that was the one we were interested in and knew about. And that ghost was a miner who was traveling an old rock road that actually used to be a major road that connected Southern Oregon to Portland back in the late 1800s. And the farm next to us, which is now Abbey Road Farm, was a stagecoach stop on that road. And people got in the habit of camping on our hill, which is now Ghost Hill. And one poor miner came up late in the season, and when he got to the top of the hill to camp, everyone else had left. Unfortunately, he had been followed, and somebody snuck into his camp and stole his gold and killed him, and in the process also killed his horse. And we also knew about that because our family, when we started developing the land, one of the neighbors actually found the remains of the horse that had been killed. And so,
is it weird that I kind of got like little tinglies going on? Yeah.
I get them all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so the medium told us about his story and 2 other Native American girls that had died on the property 500 years ago. And she told us that those 3 spirits were very happy spirits. They were happy that we were finally utilizing the land. We were doing small weddings up there, so they were happy that people were starting their lives. And that was all a good report, but then she said, unsolicited, that we also have 1 grumpy ghost up there. And we kind of all looked around thinking, well, who is that? And she said, and he died more recently during a farming accident on your farm back in the 1920s. And of course, my wife and I are looking at each other going, don't know, never heard that story. And then my father-in-law appears from the back of the crowd and he goes, oh yeah, I completely forgot about that. My dad hired a guy in 1925 to remove the stumps from the property, and he was using dynamite and he blew himself up and died.
Whoops.
And I said to myself, well, I guess if that happened to me, I'd be grumpy too. And it's funny because she said, well, you know, do you see sort of mischievous things, you know, happening at the new tasting room? And I'm like, yeah, all the time. And even when we first built the place, the guy who built it swears that he saw the ghost a couple times. And we get a lot of door slams and a lot of lights going on and off and weird things happening and people having their own experience, customers having their own experience. So I've become, even though I'm an engineer and I'm skeptical by nature, I've come to believe that there is something going on in Ghost Hill. And I encourage everybody who's listening to come up there and maybe have your own experience.
You may have like totally hit a whole new level of like client base with those that are interested in having their own little ghost encounters outside of Carlton. So yeah.
I will say that we do attract, there's a certain element of people that do come to us looking for those experiences. One of my favorite ones is we had a group of ladies that came up, and I happened to be wearing a hat that day that had a picture of a witch on it, because I play golf at Witch Hollow and had a picture of the witch on it. And the lady said to me, so do you have witches up here too? And I said, well, not that I know of. And she said, well, you do now.
Oh.
So we get those people, and I get a little tingly sometimes when they come up, and I always try to, like all our customers, I try to treat them very well, but definitely with kid gloves when they come out.
Definitely don't want to make them witch mad. It may brew up all sorts of other things that you don't want.
Yes.
Well, that's quite the story. I knew that you had done some press around like Halloween, but I didn't realize it had gone that deep to where you had a medium, and now you got witches, and you have 3 happy haunts and 1 grumpy one. I mean, what a great story.
Yeah, and even the grumpy one, I think, like I said, if the worst thing he does is slam a couple of the doors in the tasting room, I'm okay with that.
You can handle that, okay?
Yeah.
Well, I'm always interested in the farming.
Right.
And I know for a fact, because you told me, that your family did not start, obviously, planting grapes back in 1906. So what was the original commodity that they had planted there, and how did that transition from what they were doing to grapes happen?
Yeah, I alluded to that when I opened, in that when you've had a farm for over 100 years, you have to be able to pivot and change direction with what's happening with the economy. And when our ancestors got to the farm in 1906, they were dairy farmers from Wisconsin. And so that's what they did. They started a dairy. I think that lasted through the first generation. And then the second generation came through, and they started to farm livestock, so sheep and cattle. And then they just started diversifying from that and moving on to other crops and adding different elements to the farming operation. And when I met the Baylesses in the late 90s, they really gotten down to just farming beef cattle. And my wife and I were living overseas, actually living in China at the time, and they were over visiting, and we were sitting in a bar in Hong Kong, and it's just a nice place to be. But talking about cows, I never envisioned myself talking about cows in a bar in Hong Kong. But really, the discussion went, how's the cattle business? And his response was, it stinks, literally and figuratively. And so I had some other influences in my career from people in Australia and other people in the wine business. So I had some background. I'm a business person by my natural background. And so, I'm always going to ask the questions, well, what's your plan? And, and that's kind of when we figured out that we really, as a family, didn't have a plan for the farm. And the first thing I said, so when you start a plan, the first question you have to ask yourself is, what do you want? What do you want to achieve? And Mike's answer was, I really want to keep the farm in the family. He said, it's been in my family for 100 years. I would like to keep it in the family for another 100 years. And that's sort of when we started our journey down, okay, we need to do something different. And what types of things are there out there? And I had been watching the Willamette Valley for many years, growing as a wine region. And so I suggested perhaps we could look at grapes. And Mike's answer was, I'd love to do that. In fact, back in the 70s, I asked my dad if he would let me plant part of the farm in grapes, and his dad's answer was pretty rough.
Absolutely not. With some
I can't say
expletives added on there.
A lot of expletives starting with the F word, I think. But,
that word does get said on the podcast quite often, and it's usually me who is the one that drops it. But we get your drift.
Well,
yes.
Mike cleans it up himself whenever he tells me, so I figure I need to clean it up too. So the first thing we needed to do is, so I said, well, I think, Bernadette and I might be able to help with that, from a financial point of view. And I said, but the first thing we need to figure out is, can we even grow Pinot Noir there? Because where we were in the Willamette Valley, nobody had planted yet. And so Mike knew Ken Wright from Carlton.
Just a small name in the valley.
Yeah.
Nobody knows Ken.
Yeah, and so Ken was very gracious to come out, and he spent 3 hours walking the farm with us and doing what Ken does, like eating dirt and looking at different aspects of the land. I was fascinated. And then after the time, Mike said to Ken, he said, "So Ken, what do you think? Can you grow Pinot Noir here?" And Ken's response was, "You sure can. How much do you want for it?"
That's a pretty great response. You're in the right spot if Ken's offering to plant grapes there.
Well, it got even better because Mike said, well, no, I mean, the whole thing that we're trying to do here is keep the farm in the family. And Ken said, oh, fair enough. And, you know, a couple of years later, he and Tony Soder purchased the property right next to us, which is now Abbott's Claim. And they took all the trees down and took the stumps out. Nobody died in that
Well, that's good.
endeavor. And then planted their vineyard. And that's when we knew we probably had made a good decision. And so we had our grapes in by 2002. Ken Wright and Tony Soder were a little bit after us. Rebecca Moore from Monksgate, her dad Ron was right in the same timeline. So we all sort of started planting grapes there in what is now called Savannah Ridge, and which is in the heart of the Yamhill Carlton AVA. And we're producing, I think, some great Pinot Noirs, and we're
enjoying the rosé right now, which is really lovely. This is a great summer wine.
It is, yeah. And it's funny enough, the biggest accolade we've ever gotten for any of our wines, and we've gotten quite a few, but the biggest one we've ever gotten was for our rosé. In 2014, Wine Spectator chose our rosé as one of their top 70 recommended in the world.
It's a pretty big honor.
We couldn't believe it. And of course, we were starting to get, I think we made like 200 cases, and we were getting calls, you know, to buy everything that we made. And so, you know, we make rosé to make rosé. Our winemaker is Eric Homaker. I definitely should mention him. Old family friend, not our first winemaker, but he definitely bailed us out in 2015 when our winemaker got deployed as part of the Iraq operations.
Yeah, it's really hard to stop the government when they want you to move overseas. You don't have much control over that, unfortunately.
And of course, she got deployed in the middle of the vintage. So Eric had been buying grapes from us for several years, and he had offered at one point, you know, hey, if you ever need anything, you know, I'm there for you. I love you guys. He really loved our parents, and he said, I'm here for you. And you know, I don't think he realized what he was getting himself into, because here we are now almost 10 years later, and he's still our winemaker. So
if he didn't enjoy it, he would not be there.
that's true.
Yeah,
I think he
true.
does. I think he enjoys the family. And it's funny because I had a winemaker or a wine writer from California up at the tasting room this summer, and she was asking me who my winemaker was, and I said, oh, it's Eric Homaker. And she said, it kind of took me aback. She said, well, why would Eric Homaker make your wine?
That's kind of rude.
I thought it was very rude, and then, you know, I had to kind of bite my tongue in my response. And you know, funny enough, I had somebody else had asked me that a couple weeks before, and so after that I called Eric, because I said, you know, I'm probably going to get asked this question again. So I called him and I said, so why do you make our wine, Eric? You know, for those of you who don't know, Eric's married into the Ponzi family. Whatever you do, don't ever call him Mr. Ponzi. That's a big mistake. But I think he started, you know, he's got his own pedigree, you know, where he started Carlton Wine Studio. He went to UC Davis. I found out just even recently that he worked for Tony Soder at one stage. And so he's got his own, you know, wine pedigree and makes lovely wines. But I asked him, and he said, you know, I think there's 3 things about making wine for you that I really enjoy. He said, wine is just first and foremost the family. You know, I love your family. I love your parents, and I love your vineyard, because he buys fruit from us. And he goes, but probably the biggest reason is I just want to, you know, I feel like I can live vicariously through you a little bit, because I really enjoy sort of the small farming operation and winemaking, and so I think there's an element there to that too, which makes it fun.
I mean, you get a name like Eric Homaker, and who's been around for a long time and has made some very world-class wines and is very well known in there. And just because he's working for a smaller brand doesn't mean that he's like downgraded himself, I guess. I mean, there's something very special about you if someone like Eric chooses to make your wine and work with you and be that partner. It's very rude for somebody to go,
Yeah.
so, you know.
Yeah, and I think people sometimes, if you saw our roots, I mean, we're about as grassroots Oregon wine business as you can possibly be in a lot of ways. And our first tasting room was basically a shack that we built outside our front porch at the house, because when we first got in the wine business, we were serving wine in the kitchen of our house, and then we got kicked out, and we had to build this shack, and we kind of built it thinking, oh, you know, this we'll kind of work through this, and you know, eventually we'll get something built up on Ghost Hill, but it ended up taking us 15 years to get there. So
the wine business is not a cheap business or an easy business, so sometimes it just takes a little bit longer from what I understand. I have no idea because I've not done it and have really no intentions on doing it, but just by witnessing others, it's not a quick process.
No, and it isn't, and I think you know, one of the things about our family that is great is that we all have different skill sets, and so you know, one of the really cool things now is we have 4th, 5th, 6th, and now 7th generations of the family that are working in the business in some capacity, whether it's in the vineyard or whether it's in the, you know, tasting room or selling wine or buying materials, where everybody is involved, washing dishes in the case of my granddaughter, but everybody is involved, and the skill sets are really well matched, because we've got my father-in-law and brother-in-law my brother-in-law, first of all, can fix anything on the planet. And
those are important people to have around.
Absolutely.
You just never know. You need a jack of all trades.
He's a MacGyver.
Everything.
He can fix anything. And his dad, my father-in-law, Mike, he's an amazing farmer. Like, he's got a sixth sense about farming. He knows when something's not going right, and he has got great abilities there. My mother-in-law, she worked in the insurance industry for many, many, many years, so she's got that good risk-averse nature, you know, that you need in business, especially this business. And I can also appreciate that because I have the same nature. And you know, my wife and daughters are, you know, helping us do marketing and social media and all that stuff. And my son, he's a sophomore at the University of Oregon, and he basically just does whatever I tell him he has to do when he shows up.
You need those two. Yeah.
Yeah, you do. And so, you know, when we finally got up to Ghost Hill after 25 years of trying to get up there, I mean, it really, one of the, I won't say problems, I would rather call it a discipline that we had, was that we really didn't want to take any debt to get there. And so we kind of managed our farm and wine business for 25 years. And I give the credit to my in-laws to that, you know, debt-free, which is an amazing accomplishment. And so to build the new tasting room, we did take a little debt. That took a lot of convincing by me to our family. And
old farmers are very hard to convince to take on debt.
Yes, they are.
Especially if they've been debt-free for a very long time.
Yeah.
You had told me a story when I was up there, and we originally started the podcast 8 years ago at this point. This is our 8th season, and I think my 3rd interview in was with Rebecca Moore, with Becky. And she was talking about Monk's Gate and the reason for the gate and blah, blah, blah. I was actually surprised to hear that the monks are still walking the hill. So they walk Ghost Hill. They walk through your property regularly, and over at Rebecca's as well. So I just elaborate on that, because I just think it's such a cool, like, tradition, story. It might actually be a little bit creepy to see a monk walking out through, and this is me being very Hollywood childish, but it's like, do they walk with the robes on, or do they look like just plain old guys walking through the bushes?
They don't walk with their robes on. I guess they have sort of a kind of an attire that they wear, but the monks, first of all, our connection with the monks goes back since the beginning of that monastery 70 years ago. Our family, the Bayless family's always had a relationship with them. In fact, Mike Bayless, my father-in-law, was their handyman for 40 years. And so when he wasn't farming, he was fixing stuff for the monks. And so even since I've known them, the Bayless family, for the last 25 years, there's been monks walking through the farm, hanging out at the farm, trying to, kind of keep a low profile. I don't want to get too specific because I don't want to get any monks in trouble.
Let's not do
Probably
that.
not
We
good,
might all get hit with some
not good
lightning and we're
juju.
not looking, yeah.
But when we were building so first of all, the back, that Ghost Hill property where the tasting room is, abuts the Trappist Abbey property. So there's 1,300 acres that's owned by the Catholic Church behind us. A lot of people don't know that.
I did not know that. That's a lot of property.
There's a lot of property.
That's
And
a small county.
And there's some amazing hiking trails on the property. So like the hikers out there, and in fact, it's been funny since we've opened the new tasting room because we get people that are hiking the trails, and they're, especially when we were brand new, they just came upon us and they were surprised to see us at the end of the trail there. And some of them stopped in and had a glass of wine to finish their hike. But yeah, so 1,300 beautiful acres that'll never get built on, sitting right behind us, owned by the church. And when we started construction of the new tasting room, there was this monk that, I noticed this old guy walking through the property, right through the construction and everything else. And one day he actually stopped and talked to me after, many, many months of watching him walk through. And he said, "Kim, I'm Father Richard, and I just want to know, I've been walking through here for 40 years and I see what you're doing here. Are you still gonna let me walk through here?" And I said, "Oh, of course." I said, "Only two things, Father, do me a favor." I said, "Give us a blessing every time you walk through because we're gonna need it." And I said, and can you please not walk through any weddings?"
Yeah.
And he's already done that.
Walk through a wedding?
Oh yeah.
Oh,
that
jeez.
was the classic, we had,
Did he at least wave?
he was completely oblivious until he wasn't. So, and it was funny because I actually got a photo of it. So it runs in my tasting room and everybody goes, "Who is that guy?" And I said, anyway, there's 50 people standing around watching the bride and groom do their first look on the oak tree in the back of our property. And here comes Father Richards just storming through. And everybody's like, "Who is that guy? He's in the photos." And I said, "Oh, that's the monk."
Not a ghost.
Yeah, not the ghost. And then the bride and groom kind of noticed him. And then he kind of noticed where he was, realized that he had violated the second rule.
Oops.
And but it was great. He talked to the bride and groom for like 10 minutes. Everybody's sitting there watching. And then, he crossed himself, gave him his blessing, and went on his way.
Oh, that's cute. Very sweet.
And then hopefully I don't get into anybody in trouble, but every once in a while we will get a couple monks that sneak up for a wine tasting.
We won't say anything. No names, no photos.
No names, yeah.
Yeah.
But it's always funny because they always come in the back door, they sneak into our private tasting room, which is modeled after our original small shack of a tasting room. And they like that because the bar in that small private tasting room used to be the floor underneath the altar.
Oh, that's fun.
And so I think they're drawn to that, so they go back there, and then they never tell me they're there. I kind of have to discover it on my own, and then pour a couple glasses of wine.
Well, it's not a bad thing. Well, let's shift over to wine, because
Yeah.
we kind of have hinted at this lovely rosé that you've brought, but you've also brought a couple Pinots, and you sent me home with, is it Pinot Blanc?
I sent you home with the Pinot Blanc.
Okay, I'm
Yes.
like, did I get that wrong? Dang
No,
it. I
you
always
did.
get them wrong, but no, I got it
No.
right. And it was really good. I
Yes.
drank it as soon as I got home.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And our Pinot Blanc is our best-selling wine. We were one of the early adopters of that in the valley. One of my good friends, French guy named Thibaut Mendet, who used to be the winemaker at Willamette, suggested it to us when we were looking for a white wine to sell in our tasting room. And we've gotten a lot of accolades for that wine, and recently we're selected as one of the top 100 wines in the Pacific Northwest, and so somebody came in and bought everything we had left of it just a couple weeks ago.
Oh, I'm glad I got my bottle when
But
I did.
we're bottling in a few weeks, so
There'll be more.
there'll be
Yeah.
more.
Shortly
more
after
on
this
the way.
airs, there'll be more. So
Yeah.
run up to Ghost Hill and grab some while you can.
But what we're known for is our Pinot Noir, and that's kind of our bread and butter. When we planted our initial vineyard, it was 16 acres, 5 clones of Pinot Noir. We've planted some new vineyard up on the top of Ghost Hill, which is some Chardonnay and some more Pinot Noir that we'll put into a sparkling project that we have planned. But the 2 Pinots I brought here, I guess I would call our 2 flagship Pinots. One is our Prospector's Reserve. And you can see we're going with a theme there.
Well, I'd hope so. I mean, if you have a heavy theme, you should roll with it.
Yeah. And so we call our reserve wine our Prospector's Reserve. The way we go down to Eric's winery down in Beaverton, the old Ponzi estate, and we kind of pick our favorite barrels, which you can imagine you get a bunch of different family members together is not always a sort of a straightforward exercise.
I can imagine there's a lot of chaos and a little bit of arguing.
Yeah, there is, and we all have different palates too, which doesn't make it any easier. Eric tends to be the tiebreaker there, which kind of is a good segue into the other wine I brought, which is our 2018 single clone 777. And when we first started talking about these wines, having the 5 different clones in the Savannah Ridge, part of Yamhill, Carlton AVA, it was always about how we would blend those clones. And so, when we first started talking about single clone bottlings, it was kind of like a non-starter with family members and with Eric to some extent. Because his kind of thinking was, well, why would you do that? I mean, you've got all these great clones, let's just blend them like we intended to. But 777 in particular and Wadensville also do really well in that little part of the Willamette Valley. And so we were kind of sitting around tasting barrels, and the 777 by itself was so good, we decided to bottle it. And then in 2023, we bottled our first ever single clone Wadensville, so which is my mother-in-law's favorite wine, and it's called Drenda's Wadensville, which is her name. So why don't we try a little bit?
Yeah, let's pour a little bit. I'll grab this one because it's the closest. And then why is the Savannah Ridge so special? And what makes the wines different?
Yeah, it was funny. When my wife and I got back here, we were at a dinner in Portland, and there were a lot of other winemakers there, and we got to sit at a table with Tony Soder, and I asked him that same question. I said, so what is it about Savannah Ridge? First thing I wanted to know was, why is it Savannah Ridge? And Tony told me a funny story actually. He said that, after Ken and Tony they were standing on top of the hill where Tony's current tasting room is. They were looking down at the ridge, and this is Tony talking. Tony said, it's just a beautiful savanna. Looks like a beautiful Savannah Ridge. And then Tony said, and then Ken trademarked it. And anybody knows Ken's a business person. He's a great winemaker, but he's also a great business person. And I think he knew that that little part of the valley's got a few really cool things about it. One is it's all, the ridge line is all Willackenzie soil, so marine sediment, Missoula flood, high minerality. Tony told me that the orientation of the ridge itself was one of the best he'd seen in the valley. And so when Ken gave him the opportunity, or when they looked at the opportunity of planting vineyard there, he loved it. And then the third piece, and probably the most significant, I don't know, you'd have to talk to Tony and Ken to get their opinion, but we seem to have a little microclimate in there, just the way that it's oriented with the winds that come over the coastal range. And so we tend to be early pickers, which is in the past has been a good thing. And I think those three characteristics create a really interesting Pinot Noir that I know that Ken and Tony want to be there for that reason. And in fact, when they sold their original vineyard to Abbott's Claim, they both stayed there. So Tony went and built his place up at Mineral Springs on the top of the ridge, and then Ken went and leased all the vineyard that's on the Laughlin property that's on the top of the ridge. And so they remain there today. The fruit that we don't use, we sell to Ponzi. We have a strong relationship with Ponzi. They've told us that our vineyard and our fruit is some of their favorite in the valley. And so I think, when you're talking about names like Ponzi and Eric Homaker and Tony Soder and Ken Wright, talking about Savannah Ridge and the wines that are coming out of there, I think that's pretty good.
Yeah, I think that's actually a great way to end the credentials and end the wine and invite people out to the tasting room and let them experience, the ghosts, if they're so lucky. And the wines are lovely. Like this Pinot is it's really an easy drinker. It's elegant. It's very fruity. It's my kind of Pinot.
Right.
Like I like this kind of Pinot. So thank you for, bringing the wines. Thanks for taking your time. Now, where do people go to find you? Socials, website, address, all that good stuff.
Yep. So we are definitely Ghost Hill on Instagram, Facebook, and our website is ghosthillcellars.com. One last thing I'd like to talk about, since we're coming into the season now, and this is something my wife and I discovered kind of by accident last year. We were sitting up at the tasting room late on a Friday night watching the sunsets, and it was like 8:30. Two separate cars pulled up because they saw the fire going, and they said, "Are you open?" And we're like, "No, of course we're not open. It's 8:30 on a Friday night." And they said, "Well, why? Because you got a beautiful sunset going on there. If we buy a bottle of wine, can we sit there and watch the sunset with you?" And we're like, "Yeah." And then when we were sitting there with them, they said, "You guys should do this every night." I'm like, "We can't do it every night." But what we did agree on is to do it every Friday night. And so we call it Friday Night Lights. We stay open until sunset from May 2nd until usually after Halloween. And you can come up there, and we usually have some food, music sometimes, food trucks. Have a deal with Park and Main on the non-food truck nights where they'll deliver food up there for us. I call it skip the line and drink the wine up at Ghost Hill Cellars for Friday Night Lights.
That is something that I need to start putting on my calendar because I love nothing more than an evening like that. And there's something with Pinot or really almost any wine and a great pepperoni pizza that is really quite satisfying and a great way to kill a long week.
I think so, and I think one of the customers we had up there one night, he sat and looked at me and he said, "There's just no way not to relax at this place."
Yeah, and everybody needs that anymore. So
I think more than ever.
Yes. So I think you should probably be like really like stressing that on your socials of what you guys are doing on Friday. Like and you need to call and remind me that I need to come up on a Friday, and whether my husband comes with me or not, I'll be there.
Okay.
And I can now finish a bottle by myself. Probably shouldn't drive, but and I can do it. So anyhow, Cam, thanks so much for driving out, being with us, bringing wine, and we got snacks later. So no pepperoni pizza today, but other things. So
thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Good.
Dun, dun, dun.
Excellent.
Yeah.
All right. I told you I could talk. So.
Yeah, no, I'd rather that you talk than not talk.